The name that has been in trade rumors the most in the short off-season so far has been Collin Sexton, as the Cleveland Cavaliers are reportedly tossing up how valuable he is for their future and rebuild. He's apparently been made very available just recently, a week or two ago now, so a trade may be on the horizon for the young star guard. But is it really worth the Cavaliers trading him? Should they actually pull the trigger on a deal and go all in on building around Garland? Or should they try run back the Sexland duo one more time? In today's video, I'll be discussing the pros and cons of a Colin Sexton trade for the Cavs, and overall my opinion on what they should do with him this offseason, as well as looking at the potential risk that may be involved with dealing him elsewhere. Before we start, if you're new here and enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe. For more NBA content like this, I'm trying to reach 18,000 subscribers, so all support would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that being said, let's talk about Collin Sexton. Colin Sexton is coming off a career year for the Cavs, averaging 24.3 points per game, 4.4 assists, and he shot 47.5% from the field. He's put the league on notice that he really is that guy, and it's clear his potential is through the roof. It does make sense though for the Cavs to at least look over the market for him, as his value is at its peak right now. So seeing what they could get back for him does make sense when they're unsure about whether he's really their future or not. However, would it actually be worth moving him, or could they reap the benefits more by running it back? Firstly, before we look at the pros of trading Sexton, we have to understand what kind of trade package the Cavs would be getting back. I'd imagine that in general, the Cavs would receive some young players, a couple of draft picks, and maybe a veteran in there too if the salaries don't mesh well. I feel like that would get the job done for them at this point. Sexton obviously isn't a star yet, so don't expect some huge blockbuster trade in return for him, nor a guy really on his caliber, because after all, the Cavs are probably considering upgrading him through the draft, not this trade. A couple teams heavily linked to the Cavs and Sexton are Boston and New York, so what would deals look like with them? For the Boston deal, the Cavs will probably get some guys like Aaron Naismith and Grant Williams, great young players that can elevate the depth of the team. And for New York, they're probably going to receive a player like Kevin Knox back, which obviously doesn't sound great, but chuck in some picks and maybe a vet or two, and maybe it gets the deal done. Either way, both seem like reasonable destinations for Sexton right now, according to reports, and both of them would be mostly beneficial for the Cavs, particularly the deal with the Celtics. Naismith was one of the better shooters in his draft class last year and had a really solid second half to the season, getting more minutes and playing on a consistently good level for the last couple of months. He's not going to replace the value of Sexton, but he will be a great core element around the core of Garland and whoever the Cavs draft third overall. So in that sense, a trade here does make sense for the Cavs and would be beneficial in the short term and long term. In my eyes, something like that deal would be worth it for Sexton, but understandably, with any trade, there are risks involved and some cons that may make the Cavaliers reconsider. So let's talk about some of those now. The biggest problem to me with pulling the trigger on a Sexton trade now is the fact that the duo of Garland and Sexton could still work out very nicely. With more young support pieces coming in through the draft, as well as recent additions to the roster like Jarrett Allen, the future is still very bright for Cleveland with this young core. So I question why they would want to move on from it so soon and seemingly irrationally, if the Cavs were to make a trade soon, that is. There's potential a Sexton trade could send them back in the rebuild, especially if the replacement is not as impactful as Sexton was or had potential to be. That's the risk involved in trading Sexton. Yes, maybe he doesn't seem like a guy that can lead your squad to a lot of wins right now, but there's no evidence another guy they'd replace him with, likely through the draft, would do the same. There's a chance that moving Sexton, or at the very least, moving him before the draft, backfires on the Cavs. To me, it feels like Cleveland might be rushing into this trade a bit too quickly, and I think pulling the trigger too soon, mainly before draft night, could be detrimental to their rebuild. Don't get me wrong, there's also a chance that it pays off, but that's the risk they have to take. And to me, there's a much higher risk that this trade hurts Cleveland in the short term more than it helps, if the Cavs were to rush into a trade right now, before draft night that is. So, what do the Cavs do with Sexton? Do they trade him or not? Personally, I think they should wait until after the draft before trading him. I think their decision to move him or not all comes down to who the Houston Rockets draft. If the Rockets select Jalen Green, then the Cavs can get Evan Mobley, a brilliant defensive-minded center out of USC who has NBA Defensive Player of the Year written all over him. He's also extremely talented for a big man offensively, so I feel like his fit beside a duo of Garland and Sexton would be exciting and worth at least trying out for one season. Who knows, it could go somewhere special if it all works out, and if it doesn't, Colin can be traded midway next season, where his trade value is still likely to be quite high, like it is now. This isn't a now or never type of trade for the Cavs. They can afford to sit back a bit, which is why I don't really like the idea of moving him as soon as possible. If the Rockets draft Mobley on the other hand, then maybe it is best to move on from Sexton. The next best players in the draft would either be Jalen Suggs or Jalen Green, and obviously, those guys and their type of play would clash with Colin Sexton. If the Cavs truly do believe that Sexton isn't the future of the team, and one of those two guys, Suggs or Green, with Garland is, then probably trading Sexton away is the best option. Either way could be beneficial or detrimental to the Cavs, but for me, Cleveland will need to be patient with this whole Sexton ordeal. Rushing into a trade recklessly would be less than ideal and probably set them back a couple of years in the rebuild. They need to ensure this trade is the best thing for them because Sexton is still very young with a lot of potential. I wouldn't be rushing into something that could backfire on them, especially if they don't get the prospect they want in the upcoming draft. But that is what I believe the Cavs should do in regards to a Colin Sexton trade. Weighing up all the pros and cons of a trade, it's best to wait until draft day, in my opinion. Depending on who's left available will determine where they go from here. Either way, I think Cleveland has a very bright future ahead of them, and I'm excited to see what's next, with or without Colin Sexton. But for now, making an irrational trade just for the sake of it would not be the right move. And that's the problem the Cavs have with trading Colin Sexton right now. And that will conclude the video. What do you guys think of this? Should the Cavs trade Colin Sexton to you? Let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe. But with that being said, I am out. Peace.